In 1962, Brian Epstein walked in my office with a record of this group called the Beatles, which I thought was such a stupid name.
George Martin was far more than just a music producer for the Beatles. He was a visionary architect who helped shape their evolution into groundbreaking artists. It was Martin who created the environment and provided the tools that enabled the band to break away from constraints of conventional 1960s pop and venture into unexplored musical territory. Among the four Beatles, his most intricate and dynamic creative bond was with Paul McCartney. Known for his relentless pursuit of perfection and endless stream of ambitious ideas, McCartney frequently pushed the boundaries in the studio. Despite Martin's involvement in countless recording sessions, he rarely spoke openly about his unique rapport with McCartney. Much of what is known about their collaboration has been reconstructed from studio notes, third-party recollections, and behind-the-scenes glimpses. Beneath the surface of their iconic partnership was a complex web of tension, negotiation, and mutual growth. Martin once called himself McCartney's musical interpreter, though that title only scratched the surface of their layered creative alliance. Their collaboration began on June 6, 1962, inside EMI Studios on Abbey Road, London, during the Beatles' first official recording triad. At the time, Martin was producer for Parlophone, a lesser-known EMI label, tasked with evaluating the raw but promising band from Liverpool. While their initial performance didn't impress him musically, McCartney stood out with his proactive attitude unlike the more distant John Lennon and the reserved George Harrison. McCartney engaged directly with the studio crew, asked detailed questions, and shared arrangement ideas with enthusiasm. Martin, accustomed to commanding recording sessions with complete authority, was surprised by this inquisitive and assertive young artist. From the beginning, creative disagreements emerged, especially regarding song choices. Martin criticized the simplicity of Love Me Do, but McCartney stood his ground. Compromises followed, the tempo was adjusted, and the harmonica was moved to the intro, bringing the track closer to Martin's vision. Surprisingly, the song became a commercial hit, prompting both men to reassess their initial doubts about one another. One of Martin's early significant contributions to the Beatles' success was advocating for a drummer change. He felt Pete Best wasn't the right fit and suggested Ringo Starr instead. Though this caused internal friction, Martin believed it was necessary for the group's long-term cohesion. McCartney was initially reluctant but eventually agreed, marking the start of a more unified and focused lineup. Martin also regularly recorded his impressions after studio sessions, many of which highlighted McCartney's exceptional command of musical detail and maturity beyond his years. Reflecting on their early days, Martin once remarked, "Paul was the only one who insisted I justify why something wouldn't work." Their intellectual tug-of-war led to numerous debates over tempo, key, and production techniques. Yet it was through these creative clashes that respect and trust grew. Their relationship wasn't grounded in similarity or friendship, but in a shared understanding that each brought something vital to the table. Over time, their roles crystallized not as competitors, but as collaborators whose strengths complemented one another. Between 1965 and 1967, Martin and McCartney's partnership reached new heights. With albums like Rubber Soul, Revolver, and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, they didn't just ride the wave of the Beatles' fame, they redefined pop music itself. The band had transitioned from a live act to a studio-centered creative powerhouse, and central to that transformation was the evolving dynamic between McCartney and Martin. No longer bound by rigid hierarchies, they operated as creative equals, blending technical expertise with bold imagination. McCartney began arriving not just with catchy tunes, but with fully formed concepts and orchestration ideas. Rather than restrain that ambition, Martin embraced it, helping translate abstract visions into polished studio productions. A striking example of their synergy was Eleanor Rigby. When McCartney brought in the hauntingly sparse song, Martin proposed replacing traditional rock instruments with a string octet. Drawing from composers like Bartók, he arranged the piece with no guitars or drums, only raw strings, creating a sound that was both cinematic and intimate. Similarly, during the recording of For No One, though McCartney played nearly every instrument, Martin contributed a crucial suggestion, a French horn to balance the song's tone. Despite McCartney's initial hesitation, Martin quickly arranged the part and brought in Alan Civil from the London Symphony Orchestra, who completed it in just 4 takes. Martin's role wasn't to limit McCartney's creativity, but to channel it. He provided structure without stifling innovation. On the complex track A Day in the Life, which combined separate compositions by Lennon and McCartney, Martin envisioned a 40-piece orchestral bridge to unify the two parts. The recording session was dramatic, with musicians in masks and costumes, and Martin meticulously managed volume and tape speed to ensure the final chord lingered clearly for nearly a minute. During this experimental era, McCartney and Martin functioned as complementary forces, one suggesting wild ideas, the other evaluating and refining them. Disagreements were frequent but rarely personal. When McCartney proposed using reverse tape effects in Rain, Martin didn't reject the idea outright. He requested a test version, which McCartney produced, leading to the effect's purposeful inclusion. Still, their process wasn't always smooth. McCartney's creativity could be spontaneous and chaotic, often arriving at the studio with half-formed sketches and expecting swift arrangements. Martin had to balance flexibility with discipline, ensuring that the end result remained cohesive and innovative. Through it all, their partnership endured and thrived not because they always agreed, but because they trusted one another's instincts, respected their differences, and shared a commitment to pushing the boundaries of modern music. Martin never rejected the Beatles' increasing demands or tight deadlines, but he insisted on clarity if time was short. The arrangements had to be simplified. This understanding became an unspoken rule between him and the band, blending instinct with discipline. This period represented a peak in the Beatles' musical evolution and highlighted a new model for the producer's role, not just a technical facilitator, but a creative collaborator who helped turn ideas into finished works. Rather than imposing his own vision, Martin helped shape McCartney's raw ideas into structured, polished songs. Their success came not from similarity, but from leveraging their differences. As McCartney assumed more of a leadership role, the line between collaboration and control began to blur. This shift marked the beginning of what some have called a quiet unraveling. The White Album, ambitious and sprawling at 30 tracks, was a product of increasingly fragmented efforts, with each Beatle working more independently. Martin, once the unifying force behind their studio sessions, found himself on the periphery, often recording with individual members with little notice. McCartney, tightening his grip on the creative reins, would arrive with complete arrangements, direct sessions solo, play multiple instruments, and even bypass Martin altogether. Tracks like Martha My Dear were recorded without the other Beatles. Though Martin remained publicly diplomatic, he later admitted, "They weren't really a band anymore, and I wasn't really their producer." Tensions escalated when engineer Jeff Emmerich abruptly quit after a fraught session in which McCartney, dissatisfied with the bass mix and with Lennon and Harrison absent, demanded a redo. Martin didn't intervene. It was a signal that the collaborative spirit had deeply eroded. The atmosphere in the studio mirrored the group's internal fractures, as creative and managerial disputes surfaced. McCartney, determined to push forward, increasingly acted as a de facto solo producer rather than a bandleader. Martin's influence diminished, though occasional moments of synergy remained, like Lennon's impromptu piano intro for Ibla Die, Ubla Day, which McCartney accepted instantly and Martin swiftly finalized. But these were exceptions. Martin had minimal involvement in the Let It Be project, a clear indication of the growing disconnect. As the film and recording spiraled creatively, control passed to external hands, including Phil Spector, whose lush orchestration particularly upset McCartney. Feeling the heart of the long and winding road had been lost, he confided in Martin, saying it no longer felt like his song. Martin replied pointedly, "Well, Paul, you handed it off to someone else." Though he spoke without bitterness, Martin quietly declined further Beatles-related work, recognizing that the partnership had run its course. Yet, while fans speculated whether McCartney and Martin could ever reunite creatively, something unexpected happened. Free from the shadow of the Beatles, they began working together again, this time as independent artists. When the band officially split in 1970, many collaborations ended, but not theirs. In 1973, McCartney was commissioned to write the theme for Live and Let Die, a James Bond film. He personally invited Martin to produce it, marking their first official collaboration since Abbey Road. No Beatles, no Abbey Road Studios, just the essence of a partnership reborn on new terms. Paul McCartney entered the project with a melodic sketch, while George Martin took charge of arranging a full orchestra and managing the dramatic shifts between the song's various sections. The result became not only one of the most successful Bond themes ever, but also a standout moment in 1970s film music. That collaboration sparked a renewed creative partnership between the two, continuing into the 1980s as McCartney transitioned from the Wings era. By then, Martin had become a seasoned veteran, still meticulous in his approach. They reunited for Tug of War, 1982, and Pipes of Peace, 1983, working in a more harmonious environment, free from the creative tensions of their Beatles days. This newfound dynamic allowed their collaboration to flourish, echoing what their partnership had once aimed to be. Martin wasn't merely producing, he was actively shaping the direction of the albums, suggesting songs, conceptual ideas, and even guest artists. It was Martin who proposed bringing in Stevie Wonder for What's That You're Doing, a bold move that showcased his desire to expand McCartney's artistic reach. McCartney, trusting his longtime collaborator, followed through. Many consider Tug of War to be his strongest post-Beatles work, again bearing Martin's unmistakable imprint. Despite their long history, theirs wasn't a typical friendship. They weren't often seen in public together, nor did they share many personal stories. Yet those close to them say they remained in quiet contact through handwritten notes and phone calls. George Martin's son, Giles, once shared that his father kept a shelf just for Paul's demo tapes, not as work material, but because he simply enjoyed knowing Paul was still creating. Though they no longer collaborated regularly, Martin continued to express deep admiration for McCartney. When asked who had taught him the most, he'd always answer, Paul. He knew exactly what he wanted. My job was to help him get there within the bounds of what was technically possible. In an industry often marked by ego and conflict, their partnership stood apart. It wasn't sentimental or obligatory. It was rooted in mutual respect. Each knew their role, and neither tried to overshadow the other. When Martin passed away in 2016, McCartney didn't host a grand tribute. Instead, he offered heartfelt words, calling Martin a gentleman, a studio genius, and like a second father. Later that year, he held a quiet memorial in a small Oxfordshire chapel, no press, no spectacle, just a piano, a few friends, and a demo tape edited by Martin in 1981, labeled in his handwriting, unfinished but honest enough. Since Martin's death, McCartney has spoken of him more frequently not in rehearsed tributes, but as part of his creative language. Whether discussing orchestration or sound layering, he often references Martin's lessons. In 2022, McCartney told Giles that he sometimes hears George's voice during songwriting asking, "Is this for the music, or are you trying to prove something?" For McCartney, Martin never truly left. He became an internal compass, guiding him in the quiet spaces between notes. That thoughtful influence only grew as McCartney faced the rise of new technologies like AI. In 2023, while testifying before the UK Parliament, McCartney voiced ethical concerns about using AI to mimic deceased artists. When asked if AI could ever bring back George Martin, he replied, "Absolutely not. We shared long stretches of silence that said more than words. No machine can understand what those silences meant." After Martin's death, his family released a trove of unpublished writings, some of which reflected on his bond with McCartney. In one undated note, Martin admitted, "Working with Paul wasn't always easy, but said the tension kept him sharp. I handled the orchestration, but he gave it meaning." He wrote in another, more poetic line, "There was no formal goodbye between them, but McCartney's reflections continue to carry emotional weight." Likewise, Martin's handwritten notes about Paul reflect a connection that transcended labels like friend or collaborator. It was a bond built on mutual respect and complementary strengths, McCartney chasing inspiration with artistic freedom, and Martin grounding it with structure and precision. Even when their creative paths diverged, they never lost sight of each other's importance. Today, Martin's influence still lingers for McCartney, not through technology, but through the discipline, emotion, and silence that define their work. Their partnership remains a model of what creative synergy can truly be.